Hey guys, it's me again, and I haven't made a video on this channel for a while, and I recently watched the interview with Ian that Preach did. Huge shout out to both of them for doing that and making that possible. And it really kind of inspired me to make this video, and I want to do this a little bit different than the way I've done many of my other videos, even on this channel. I don't want to do this video as Asmongold. I don't want to do this video as ZackRawrr. I want to do this video as just simply a guy who's played WoW for the past 15 years, and I just kind of want to share my thoughts without a whole lot of showmanship or anything. I just kind of want to talk about how I feel. I think that this is a really good time to do that, and I feel like it's something that's necessary. So anyway, I watched the interview with Preach and Ian, and half of the answers that Ian gave were okay, and the other half were not. And I think that probably if I had to think of a word to describe the interview at all, the word would be disappointing. Now, the reason why I think it's disappointing is the fact that I feel like the WoW team as a whole has kind of gone down this path in probably like the last 5 years of developing systems and then putting those systems into the game, iterating on the systems throughout the expansion, and then once the expansion is finished, the system is in somewhat of a completed state, and then the system's removed and then replaced with a new system for the next expansion, and the cycle repeats itself. And I think that we've seen this happen with Legion Legendaries, we've seen this happen with Azerite armor, we've seen it happen with Corruptions, we've seen it happen now again with Anima, with the changes that people had suggested in beta are now finally being implemented into the 0.1 and most likely the 0.2 patch. And also we're seeing them with tier sets and a number of other things as well. And I think that the first point that I want to actually talk about is tier sets. Ian announced that tier sets are coming back into the game, and they're going to be being added back into the game in 9.2, which is going to be, I'm assuming, the third raid in Shadowlands. I think this is a good thing, but I think that people's optimism and happiness is a bit misguided. This is something that we've had in the game for 15 years. It was removed without a whole lot of rationality or logic behind it, and now we're having it added back into the game, and people are celebrating it like it's a win. I think that obviously I appreciate them listening to feedback, but I'd like to get to a point to where we can move beyond getting things back that we already had. I think that's not good for the game at all. Just continuously having this basically platter of activities and abilities that players have, and then every expansion there's 8 things on the platter, Blizzard takes 5 off, and then people get excited when they get the next 3 back again. It's just not really exciting or innovative or interesting or fun. Now, I don't like it at all. And as excited as I am about tier sets, there's a certain degree of resentment that I see whenever the community applauds something that to me seems like something that should have never happened in the first place. And on top of that, it's something that should have been added in the first tier. And I think that this is actually a greater, bigger issue, which is the complacency of not only the developers, but also the players. I think the players have become much too complacent and much too accepting of very clear problems that the game has, and people have been completely okay with saying, oh, well, they'll fix it in X patch, or they'll fix it in Y patch, or in the future, or I'm sure by next expansion they'll have it hammered out. I don't think that we should accept those types of answers, especially whenever it's things that actively make the game worse, and the solution to those things is fairly evident. I think that back in Legion, for example, and I don't really want to talk a whole lot about previous expansions, but I have to give these examples in order to establish a certain degree of a pattern here. So in Legion, people asked ever since the very beginning of the alpha in Legion, and then also the beta in Legion, for there to be not only targetable legendaries that you can work towards as your class, but also on top of that, for you to be able to have some sort of a resource that you can actively farm and you can actively work towards in order to get those legendaries and not just completely leave it up to luck. That was a change that people wanted and something people wanted out of the system ever since basically before the game even came out, and it didn't happen until 7.3 or 7.35. And that's like a 1.5 year difference that it took for a suggestion that happened in alpha to make it into the main game. And I think that if you were to ask anybody during Tomb of Sargeras or during Nighthold or Trial of Valor, how they felt about legendaries. I think that many people would have thought that they were good items and they were fun to use, but the acquisition method was bad. Why is it that we have to sit around and wait for sometimes years in order for something that seems like an obvious decision that oftentimes ends up happening be added into the game? And I think that another example of this is Anima, and there's another example too, which is corruptions. And this happened in BFA. And it's an ongoing pattern that Blizzard has continuously gone down, which is they will introduce a system into the game, and the system will be incomplete or broken or some way dysfunctional in a way that's actually fairly evident. Like, for example, the corruptions. You can't corrupt your gear, and the corruptions are massively game-defining and meta-defining, and there's no way for you to choose which ones you get. You just have to randomly get them, and it is what it is. Now, I think that no player really wants to have a system like that. I think that something like that works just fine in a game like Diablo, or a game like Path of Exile even, where to some degree you're not really playing with other people, and so you don't have to actively compete with them for different things. You can just, sometimes you grind and you get one good item or you get another good item, but you don't get every good item all the time. And I think that for an ARPG or something like that, it works just fine. But I think that this has been another kind of meta pattern that Blizzard has taken, is that I feel like a lot of the Blizzard developers genuinely do not play World of Warcraft the same way that their players do. And I think that's evident by the amount of changes that the developers add into the game that are either changes that have been asked but for by the very highest degree of PvP players or PvE players, because those are the people who have the ear of the developers, or on the other side, changes that are just completely antithetical to what an MMO is supposed to be. Things like Titan Forging, or things like the random Legion legendary system, or corruptions, or I think that to some degree some of the gearing changes in Shadowlands fall into that category as well. Same thing with Conduit Energy, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. Apologize, there's a plane a little bit over. Jesus, it's loud. Wow. I hope it doesn't crash in my house. Anyway, so basically the way that I feel about this is that whenever I look at this situation and I see how things have gone, I see the exact same pattern being repeated. And the Blizzard developers are disconnected from the community, and what they think players want is not what players want. And I think also many of the developers lack the insight to understand what players need. I think that there's a big difference between giving players what they want and giving players what they need. And I think the best example of really great game design that Blizzard has done, because I don't think that it's impossible. I don't think these people are, to some degree, I do think that they're incompetent, I'll be honest. But to some other degree, I also think that they are just making mistakes. They're listening to the wrong people, and they don't have as close of a connection to the community as they used to. And an example of Blizzard making very great game design is the Awakened mod in Mythic Plus at the end of BFA. The reason why it was such a great mod is that it allowed you to completely change up the way that you did the dungeons. It totally revolutionized the role that rogues had in different dungeons, because before that, Veil of Shadows, or what was it called? The concealment thing that would make everybody else invisible and you could just skip packs, was just so meta-defining in Mythic Plus that almost every single high-end team had that. And whenever you had this affix added in, it completely invalidated that, and it made it much less important, and it added in a certain unique type of gameplay that was interesting in many different ways. And I think that for example, the problem with Mythic Plus before then was that rogues were too powerful. And what players wanted was for Blizzard to nerf Shroud of Concealment, which was the rogue invisibility thing. I just couldn't think of it a minute ago. But what players needed was an alternate way to do dungeons. And the insight of a game developer, the insight of a great game developer, is to, in my opinion, take what players want and then discern from that what players need, and then create that type of experience. And I think the Awakened mod was a great example of being able to do that. And I don't think that it's impossible for Blizzard to do this, but I do think that it's improbable, and it certainly has been that way for a while. I think that oftentimes we'll see different types of things added into the game that are things that the players want exactly, and Blizzard just decides to give players what they want without actually thinking about why they want it. I think that another example of this is, I think that I might get into a little bit of hot water with this, but it's solo queue with PvP. I think that the truth is that maybe Blizzard should add solo queue. I think so many people want it. Why don't we just add it and just see what happens, right? I think that'd be nice. But I don't think that's really going to solve any problems with PvP, because I think the core issue is the fact that there's no PvP community anymore. There's no shared space for PvPers to interact with each other with. And overall, it's just such a hollow experience from what being a PvPer used to mean back in Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King or Cataclysm, or even Mists of Pandaria for that matter. And just over time, PvPers have become more disconnected from each other. PvPers have not been able to interact with each other in the same way, and that's led people to feel like they need solo queue because they don't have those spaces to interact with other players. And I think that's probably at the very core of what a lot of these issues are, is Blizzard continues to treat symptoms and not diseases. And I think that that's one of the big issues that the development team has, is that because they're not playing the game the same way that their players are, that they don't have the insight into understanding why players are running into these problems, because the developers aren't running into them themselves, so they can't actually kind of break down what the behavior pattern is that led them to that point. And I think that's a huge issue. It really is. And another thing, I'll go back to corruptions, and another reason why I think this is the case is that the first week of 8.3, they nerfed Twilight Devastation by 50% in PvP. Now, you don't do a 50% nerf on an ability like that unless you just didn't test it and you didn't put any effort into figuring out if it was good or not. Like, there's no way you think, oh wow, this is going to be fine, and then you need to nerf it by 50%. Any normal person would think that, and I can almost guarantee you that there was feedback on the forums about that exactly. And I think that overall, Blizzard has become very fixated on throttling players and around creating a uniform experience for players to have. I think that Renown is a good example of that, where all players go through the same thing at the same time. And the reason why I'm using Renown as an example is I actually think that Renown is not that bad. The problem, in my opinion, lies in the implementation of it, and I think the cynicism that implementation creates in players. So I'll give you another example, is Anima. Right now, Anima is not really very fun to farm, and it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Most Anima things that you get are pretty much just cosmetics. They don't really matter a whole lot at all, but it's very clear that whenever Anima and Stygia 2 that was added into the mod, it's very clear that these two systems were not added into the game with a certain degree of insight into how players would enjoy them, and they were also clearly unfinished. And there were plenty of things that people had been asking for ever since the beginning of the alpha for Shadowlands that are just now happening with Anima, and just then happened with Stygia as well. And you have all these little minor examples, like people dying in the air with their character, and then they can't recover their Stygia, and GMs can't help them. Why is that? Why is this okay? Why are we not speaking out about clearly just incompetence and being ignored? It's ridiculous that this is even a consideration. There are games that are free to play that have better customer service than this. It's embarrassing. And I understand that things are hard. I understand that things like this are happening, and you have COVID, etc. But whenever I see Blizzard that fires 800 people, and then suddenly there's a bunch of customer service problems, me as the player and also the consumer, I begin to wonder where their priorities are at. And it really does make me worried whenever I see them taking these shortcut solutions and selling themselves short. And I think that's also another thing that's happened. I think that Blizzard is so afraid of players finishing the game that they add in artificial throttling devices that will make it impossible for players to finish the game. I think that examples of this are just endless Anima grinds. I think it was the same thing with corruptions, and I'll give you an example with corruptions. I cannot. I talked about this a lot, right? I streamed almost all of 8.3. I still never found a compelling argument for why the corruption vendor was on a rotation. Why? Why was it on a rotation? And I don't mean to just talk about BFA, but again, I mean to establish a pattern. And I'll go ahead and do that now. Why is Conduit Energy in the game? Why do we have Conduit Energy in the game right now? What purpose does this serve? Who is this helping? And I think Blizzard developers are solving problems that players don't have by using solutions that players don't want. And that's exactly what's happened for years now. And I'm tired of it. I'm exhausted whenever I play the game and I do all of my world quests, and 3 world quests in, I just want to go and do, I want to go watch a YouTube video or something like that. It's basically like, imagine every world quest, I spend 100% of my effort on the first one, then 70%, and then by the 4th or 5th world quest that I have to do for the Anima or for these other different types of rewards that Blizzard has created, I'm barely even paying attention to the game. I'd rather, take a flight path that takes me 5 minutes so I can just not play the game than run 30 seconds. And I think it's just a very unfortunate situation that Blizzard has trained players into not playing the game and into waiting for later patches for systems that are, in my opinion, intentionally flawed to be fixed because of some sort of arbitrary time reason. And what I mean by that is that I think Blizzard, and this is probably maybe a conspiracy theory, but I think it's true. I think that Blizzard intentionally releases systems into the game that are unfinished and that are hard to use. And then they use the fixing of those systems as a reason later on to artificially increase engagement of those systems later on. And what I think this really does is it creates a pattern and a cycle of cynicism within the players, because people are tired of just being fed shit and then be expected to wait 4 months for it to actually not be shit. I don't really know why people are not asking for these things to be removed immediately, asking for these things. I don't want to wait for 9.1. I don't want to wait for 9.2 for obvious functional game changes to occur. And I'll give you kind of another example of this happening in BFA, because I think BFA, the reason I'm using that as an example for many of these things, is that BFA is a full expansion cycle that these things have occurred in. And I think another example of this is Azerite armor. I don't think anybody appreciated having to hold 3 or 4 helmets in their inventory because Blizzard thought having spec-specific Azerite armor was stupid for the entire expansion. Let me ask you, now that BFA is over, did having 3 helmets and 4 different pairs of shoulders in your inventory for the entire expansion give you a better experience? Because the answer in my mind is absolutely not. It was annoying and it was stupid and it made you have to pick and choose with there being no upside whatsoever. There was really no positive about it. And I remember Ian was talking about how the Azerite respec cost was too much because it kept doubling infinitely. And I got really mad about that statement. And the reason why I got mad about that statement is because Ian is the game director. Ian could just go in and change it if he wanted to. Now, obviously, Blizzard is probably getting into the point where they are, instead of too big to fail, they're too big to succeed. He'd probably have to go through 8 different board meetings in order to decide whether to change a variable in one minor feature in the game. But the truth is that that's a problem in itself. Blizzard is not agile with changes. Blizzard is not able to fix these things in a timely manner that makes players feel like their time is being respected. And I'm sorry, but whenever I'm sitting there doing Torghast 2 times a week, why do I have to do Torghast 2 times a week? Why is 1 time for all of my Soul Ash not enough? Why do I have to repeat, really, I mean, let's be honest, the exact same content twice? Why are these different types of systems like Renown, especially for same Covenant characters, why are these systems not account-wide? Nobody levels up a character to do World Quest twice. People level up a character generally to do some of the core in-game features. People do not want to fill up the bar of this basically World Quest counter of reputation multiple times on different characters. I genuinely do not think that's normal player behavior, even though Ian insists that it is, because I've never spoken to a person who's like that, and I actually just think that he's wrong, because he's talking about how Conduit Energy is useful, and he explained how it's a good idea to have the corruption vendor on a rotation. I actually don't think there's a huge amount of people that think that. I don't think there's a huge amount of people that do that. I think that he's wrong, because that's the things that he's been wrong with before. There are very few things that Ian has been right about that have actually had to do with player behavior. I think that Ian is a great raid designer. The raids that he was in charge of designing, I think, were some of the greatest raids of all time. And I think that the endgame PvE experience, Castle Nathria, seems to be a very, very good raid. And I do also want to say, at the very high levels of raiding and PvP, truthfully, my opinion doesn't really mean shit. I haven't raided or PvP'd very seriously for a very long time. So I'd defer to somebody else who has more knowledge, but I think that many other people who do seem to share the same sentiment, especially with raids. I think that across many of the high-end raiders that I've spoken to, many of them have said multiple times that one thing that Blizzard has not, dropped the ball on is raids. And I'm really glad to see that. But I think that one blind spot that Ian and the WoW team in general has is understanding how different changes and different systems make players feel. And I think this is a huge issue, because I think that so often they design content with the way the game should be played, and then they don't iterate on that content based off of how the game is being played. And that's led players to, I think, have a lot of resentment towards the game and be very frustrated about how the game is basically not catering to them and not creating a fulfilling experience. Because I think that's fundamentally what it is. People play video games, in my opinion, to feel good to some degree or to distract themselves. And I think that, and maybe this is just me projecting, but I think there's a lot of people who, the moment that I play a video game and I feel like I'm wasting my time, I stop playing a video game. I just stop playing the game. Like, that's it. I like the illusion is broken. It's like I'll try to think of like an analogy. I don't know. It's like whenever Gandalf fucking purged Saruman's influence from King Theoden and Rohan in Lord of the Rings. Okay, a bit of a nerd reference, but I think that you guys know exactly what I'm talking about if you know what I'm talking about. Is that it will immediately snap you out of that feeling of enjoying the game, and you'll go from I'm loving this to I'm hating this in just a matter of minutes. And it will create apathy, it will create resentment, and you'll just move on and stop playing the game. And I think that so many systems in the game end up creating that because Blizzard is more focused on how players should feel rather than how players do feel. And too much content in the game is being developed without the insight of somebody who understands the psychology of the players. And I think that's evident by the amount of systems that have been added in that have, if anything, just encouraged apathy in the game. Anima, the corruption system, the Azerite system, the Legion Legendary system, and I can go on probably and think of more as well. And I think at a certain point, it's very tiring. And for me, as I've played the game for a long time, there are a lot of these like little, very small, minor things that I don't really think anybody cares about except for like me. So like a small thing is that in all the Shadowlands rares, the rares only drop their unique item if you're killing them with the correct spec or you're killing them with the correct class. So for example, if I'm trying to farm a rogue dagger off of a rare in Bastion, I have to be a rogue in order to farm that. Or maybe a feral druid can equip it, or a hunter or something like that. But overall, you have to be that specialization. Why is that? Why is it not that you can just kill them and have the item drop because it's for transmog anyway and nobody's going to realistically use it? And these types of changes and just these little small design flaws in my mind just go to show, and they become evident of a larger problem of a disconnect between the players and the developers being able to accurately understand and create content that's fulfilling for players. I think that's one of the biggest issues that the game has, is that it's just simply not fulfilling. And I think that Castle Nathria is a very good example of that. I know that my guild has had a lot of trouble with that, and I've heard from a lot of other guilds too that the raid is just simply not worth the trouble. And I don't really know exactly what the solution for that is. Is it just make the best absolute gear in the world drop from the raid? I don't know. In a way, I think that might be the solution, but in a way, not. It's the same thing with Mythic Plus. I feel like Mythic Plus hasn't really been innovated a lot ever since Legion. I think that Blizzard has taken the safest approach possible with Mythic Plus and also with Arena and PvP competitive in general, because I think that the advent of the MDI and the AWC has actually caused the competitive elements of the game to stagnate because Blizzard doesn't want to take a risk on imbalances. And I think that, for example, we don't really see RBGs being innovated at all. We don't really see any sort of interesting keys occurring at all. It's just the same boring 2 affixes with the seasonal affix. It was a great idea. I'll give them credit for that. It was a great idea. But you need more than that. And I think especially for average players, you need something to really get people excited. And I think that's what really the issue is that there's just not a whole lot of things in the game that get you excited. Now, is this something that's the case because I've played the game for 15 years and it's harder to excite me now than it was whenever I was in high school and 16 years old? I think that's a factor, but I think that also whenever I see, for example, the armor from the Chains of Domination patch, the plate Mythic Maw armor, that motivates me to want a Mythic raid. And it's the same exact feeling I got back whenever I saw the Blackrock Foundry Mythic Raid armor for Warriors, the Iron Star, like red and black armor. I thought to myself, you know what, guys? I was thinking about skipping out on the raid this tier, but turns out old Asmongold, maybe it's down for another round. And I think that it's not just because I'm older or I'm jaded or anything like that. I think that there's actually a lack of innovative and interesting and inspired content. And I think that lack of innovative and inspired and interesting content comes from a disconnect between the developers and the players, a fixation on trying to make players play a certain way and preventing certain play styles from occurring. And so often it feels like it's the developers against the players, and the development of the game is often an adversarial relationship between the people that want the game to be fun and the developers that want to throttle the game for whatever reason. And I think the 2 examples of that kind of that tug of war is Conduit Energy right now, and then previously the rotation on the corruption vendor. So I see these things happen. I see people continuously become more apathetic about the game. And I see Ian come on and interview with Preach, and I do want to say again, I really appreciate Ian coming on and talking about it, and that's why I've tried to be as direct and just honest as possible in this video, because this is just my genuine feedback. This is really just how the game makes me feel. And I think that we need more of this. I think that we need more of these interviews. We need more of these conversations, because the truth is that I love WoW. I've loved WoW for 15 years. This little hat here is from WoW. I think it's actually from Hearthstone, but you know, Hearthstone is from WoW, so it is what it is. And ultimately, I really care about this game a lot, and I want to see it do better. Obviously, there are other games I'm excited for, other games that I care about, but WoW is always going to be the game that I love. And I hate to see it go down this route, and I don't think that it has to. I think that a lot of times that we can expect better, and I think that we should. We shouldn't expect to play with a bad system for the rest of the expansion. We shouldn't expect to play with a bad system for the rest of a patch. People should want changes immediately if those changes impact the way they enjoy the game. And I think that Ian has almost a defeatist attitude around that, oh, well, we can't change this, you know, this is an expansion thing or whatever. Who cares? Well, like, these are your own rules that you've created. Nobody else has these rules. This is something that's completely fabricated. This is in your head. And I think that more players need to wake up and see that, and we need to ask for and expect better, because I know Blizzard can do it. I know that they can make better content, and I think that there have been many cases, even recently, of them being able to do that. I think Shadowlands is a massive improvement over BFA in 100 different ways. And there are some things that I like better about BFA, but that's a handful, and there's hundreds that I like better about Shadowlands. Let's keep asking for better content, and let's keep expecting better content. I don't want to wait until the next expansion or the next patch to be able to enjoy the game. I want to enjoy it now. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much how I feel, and that's pretty much it. Really hope the game gets better. I'm gonna probably go inside and farm Anima for 15 minutes and then watch a YouTube video because I get bored. Peace.